Things up, or would you like me to go?
You go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to the first virtual A11y, or sorry, we're going a11yHAM, aren't we? We're the first virtual, and hopefully we're back in person soon, but if not, I guess we'll see you next month. Presentation from Karen McCall, who's a longtime dear friend of mine and colleague. We've known each other for a very long time, and actually she was one of the first people I met in the industry who also understood and was passionate about PDF accessibility. So it's great to be able to do this. And Karen, thank you so much. I know that this was a presentation that was originally planned for an event in Europe. So thank you for giving us the exclusive North American debut. And Karen is a world-renowned expert in document accessibility, a former member of the ISO committees for PDF and PDF accessibility, and really someone who's passionate about ensuring that people have equal access to content. So Karen, over to you. Oh, sorry, I need to do one more thing. We are A, recording this, B, any questions, please stay muted through the conference. Any questions you have, this will be interactive at the end. I'll be curating that discussion through chat. So in the bottom right-hand corner, obviously you've got the chat window available. Put those questions in, we'll feed them in at the end of the presentation. There is also closed captioning available. So at the bottom of the screen, it is the first in from the right next to reactions. You'll be able to view closed captioning. And forgive me, but I don't offhand recall who is doing the captioning this evening, but maybe Jen can type that in and I'll pass that along. If there are any questions, please feel free to send me a note and we'll get that taken care of. Let's enjoy the next hour with Karen. All yours, Karen.
Oops, thank you. Good, the keyboard does work. Welcome to this presentation that is partly my experiences as a person with a disability living through this pandemic and just trying to survive, and partly experiences that I have come across from other people with disabilities that seem to fit into categories of education and employment. And as we are going along with this stay at home and I don't have any contact with anyone, the divide, the pandemic, the hidden pandemic, which is what I'm calling it, is visible to more and more people around the world are starting to take notice. So that is why this is called COVID-19 and the hidden pandemic. I looked up the dictionary definition of pandemic, and this is from Wikipedia. And a pandemic is a disease epidemic that has spread around a large region, for instance, multiple countries and continents. And what I relate the digital inaccessibility to is that disease. And we have had this disease festering since at least 1998. In 1998, we knew that the internet was here, that the digital world was here. We knew about digital inaccessibility and digital accessibility, and we have made some inroads, but there is still a lot of excuses and a lot of apathy. The apathy is in the form of, oh, well, it's only a percentage of the population. It's not really important. It's not my customer base. I don't have any students with disabilities in my class. No one with a disability will want to take my course, which I find very sad for those instructors, that their content is so boring that not even those of us with disabilities will want to take their courses. In 2015, it was estimated that 1 billion people in the world had a disability. That wasn't necessarily counting seniors with disabilities. And if we look now at the total population of India, which I happen to know because they had a stay-at-home order 2 weeks ago, the population of India is 1.3 billion people. So if we move from 2015, the 1 billion people with disabilities, basically the entire population of India represents people with disabilities around the world. So that is a lot of people. And it's a lot of people who we are now discovering have no access to all of their educational material because we've moved online. Employees with disabilities don't have access to applications and tools that they may need at home. And my own experience with online shopping demonstrates that we may survive COVID-19 only to die of starvation in our own homes. We've talked for the last couple of years, well, actually the last year. I first heard this, and unintentional barriers. And it was a way to kind of coax people who really weren't into accessibility, were hesitant, were obstinate, fought it, dug their heels in, and we kind of coddled them by saying, well, we know you have unintentional barriers, but let's just consider people with disabilities. And what we're realizing, at least those of us with disabilities and those of us in the field of advocacy are realizing that this pandemic means that we no longer have time to coddle those people. We no longer have time to let them come to their own realization that accessibility and inclusion is something that we need to do. We have to be proactive. We have to have a strategy, and we have to make sure that what we create digitally, especially digitally because this is where we are moving now, has to be accessible for those of us with disabilities. So I'm now rejecting the whole notion of talking to someone about their unintentional barriers and dealing with the topic head on. It is time for excuses to be gone. And as I said, we can't allow people to say that there are no students with disabilities in their courses, that only a small number of people will shop online who have disabilities, so it's not important. One of the things that the school board in my area is doing is canvassing students to see if they have computers or not. And if they don't have computers and they don't have access to the internet, they're sending their assignments out in print. That doesn't help students who are blind, visually disabled, have learning or cognitive disabilities or other print disabilities once they get this print in the mail. And hopefully, as Adam said, he has to now make an appointment to get his mail. If you're living in a rural community, even if you're living in an urban area, having to guess when your assignments are going to be at the post office and go pick them up. But then the problem is, how do you read them? So we can't accept the excuses anymore. I'm just taking a look at my text on the screen. This basically says what I was saying, that we have known for over 20 years that we need to move digital accessibility into the forefront. There has been, since 2015, when the United Nations established the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, there has been a concerted effort to at least talk about inclusive education. The problem is no one can agree on exactly what inclusive education is or how it should be managed in a global community. As I said before, we can't listen to the we can'ts. We have to phrase this as you have to. This is part of your job. This is how we create digital content in 2020. And this is what you have to learn. This is what you have to teach your students. And anything that comes out of education, whether it is with an architectural degree, a multimedia degree, an animation degree, or anything that involves word processing, presentation material, or spreadsheets, anything that you produce has to be inherently accessible so that someone can read it if they do have a visual disability, a learning disability, cognitive or other print disabilities. So this represents my frustration at hearing stories and trying to access information about COVID-19. One of the things that happened to me very early in this whole event, and I can't believe it was only a month ago. For me, it was less than a month ago. On March the 15th, I decided to go out for lunch with some friends. And in the back of my mind, I had the idea that this may be the last time in a while that we would be able to get together. So I decided not to call them or have them come and pick me up because one lived in Brantford and the other one lived the other side of Paris. I was going to be my usual independent self and take a taxi. We do have reduced taxi fares as part of our paratransit here where I live. So I took a taxi. And then on Monday morning, that was Sunday, on Monday morning, I went down to the local drugstore, picked up some last minute supplies. And then when I came home, I called that taxi company to go and get some groceries. And the owner of the taxi company, who I know, because it is a small town, said that one of his passengers before I had taken it on Sunday, had tested positive for COVID-19. I immediately called the restaurant, I called the drugstore, I called everybody I had contact with. The Ontario Public Health Unit was swamped with calls, as you can imagine. And so I emailed them and I documented everything I did because I thought this is important. This is a pandemic and they need to know what my experience was. And then I self-quarantined for 14 days. So 2 days after I sent the email to public health, I got a phone call. They left a message and they said, well, you know, you're kind of like low risk and don't worry about it. If you have any symptoms, then you can go to the hospital or, you know, you can call telehealth or something like that. And if you do need to be tested, there's no testing in your area. You're going to have to go to Hamilton or Toronto or Kitchener, I think was the other option. And I'm listening to that phone message and I'm thinking, okay, I don't drive. The whole reason I'm self-quarantining is because I got into a taxi where there was someone who had tested positive. So if I'm positive but asymptomatic and I get into another taxi or the GO bus or the GO train or another public transit, I'm going to be spreading it around. And if I am not, if I don't have COVID-19, my odds are I'm going to get it, all to get a test. So I went online and I started monitoring social media for information on COVID-19. At that time, the government website, which is what you have on this screen, it was very usable. It was really easy to read. It was easy to find information about the number of cases in Canada, which at that time, which was March 16th, I think it was. It was very comforting because there weren't a lot of cases, but trying to find information in an accessible format about COVID-19 was almost impossible. I kept finding things that said, well, it's like the flu, but it's not. Well, what's different about it? Nobody had any answers. I then got some information that there were high fevers, and so I, was checking my fever. There were headaches. Okay, headaches. But how do you know when you've gone from the flu to COVID-19? And the information was inaccessible, is putting it mildly. I would go to a website and there was just so much other stuff and advertising that my screen reader just lost focus and skipped around the entire page so that the information didn't make sense. And there were some pages that kept going up to that social media bar. So I'd start reading a paragraph and all of a sudden it was linked to Twitter, linked to LinkedIn, linked to, and it's like, okay, where was I? And trying to get back down to it. So the websites I didn't find were helpful because of all of the bling that was on the website. Then people started publishing PDF documents. And the two that I have are real beauties. They would be untagged PDF documents, and these would be coming from international organizations or organizations of or for people with disabilities. And I would either get an untagged PDF or I would get a PDF that was tagged, but nobody checked the tags. So again, unreadable. This is one of the first documents that came out. It was a United Nations COVID-19 planning guide. And when I saw they published this, I thought, well, this is really good. I can read about planning, I can make myself safer, I can see what my community is supposed to be doing. And the image on this slide shows that my screen reader came up because I do have a screen reader. When I open an untagged PDF, I get this message that says, this isn't a tagged PDF, it's not an accessible PDF. Do you want me to try and figure it out? Figuring it out doesn't always result in anything that is readable. So normally I would just press my escape key, close out of the document, which is what I did with this one, although I did archive it to use in training in terms of what not to publish. And I never did get to read the planning guide. The next thing I found was from Disability Australia. And this is an interesting, inaccessible PDF because it's all about a human rights approach to the coronavirus. This is the document that was tagged, but not checked. So there were no headings. Most of the document was paragraphs. And I would read the first paragraph on page 1. I would then zip around to maybe page 2, read a paragraph, come back to page 1, read a paragraph, go to page 3, read a paragraph. I do have some vision, so I was able to watch my focus jump around the document, and again, made no sense. So I gave up looking at any documents that anybody was publishing on COVID-19. I ended up getting most of my information from the television and the radio. There were news clips on Twitter from around the world. I subscribed to like Sky News and BBC and CBC, so I was able to get some information. One of the other problems that I found was that the CBC had a really good video on how to wash your hands. And it was done by a surgeon. It is excellent. If anyone can find it and watch it, it is a really good, it's very descriptive. So someone who was blind or visually disabled would be able to listen to this and follow the instructions. However, not captioned. So anyone who was deaf or hard of hearing would not be able to follow those instructions. So here we have our own Canada Broadcasting Corporation putting out information that would be valuable for people in this pandemic, and it's just not quite accessible. Then to compound that, about half an hour later, the a11yHAM Health, which has the Ontario Trillium in a purple background, which I'm assuming is Ontario Health, issued a tweet that said, if you're worried about COVID-19, you need to read this. And it was a slideshow with no description, no audio. The other thing about this was that the fonts and the background were very close in color. So even if I could have read it, and it was going by so fast that someone with a visual disability, again, a learning, cognitive, or print disability, never would have been able to read an entire slide before the next one came. So again, this is our provincial government. We have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and not accessible. They published this Twitter handle, Twitter ID, published several, this is important, you need to know this, pieces of information in exactly the same way, inaccessible slide presentations. So just finding information that is going to keep me healthy is very difficult. I ended up feeling like I was very isolated, as well as quarantined. I was very isolated from information and not sure of exactly what to do to keep myself safe. I am a person with a disability who does not have any other underlying disabilities, and I can't imagine what people who do have underlying disabilities or who depend on personal service workers would feel in not being able to get any accurate information about what they should expect and how they would be able to tell it in terms of different symptoms from what they would experience every day. That information just isn't there. So then I started monitoring the lists that I'm on, and because my interest is education, I wanted to see how we were going to do with online education. I know how much material out there isn't accessible, so I was looking to see what was happening with both the students and with the disability services people. So the first problem is one that's shared by a lot of people, that the access to high-speed internet and the access to appropriate data plans is not always there. For example, in the next county to mine, they are still using DSL and rotary phones in some areas of that county. So trying as a student or even as a teacher or as an employee to work remotely from home is almost impossible, and the data plans are expensive. I do know some teachers, and they were tasked with calling students and finding out if they had computers and if they had access to the internet. And the students don't really understand the difference between the data plans on their phones and the high-speed internet that you may get for your house to watch Netflix or BritBox or something like that. So for the students that didn't have high-speed home-based internet, the response was, "Oh yeah, I have it on, I have it on my iPhone. I have a data plan." Most of those data plans will not support online learning. This is one of the problems that has been identified internationally as a barrier for students with disabilities to online education, is that a lot of countries, you may have cell phones with talk and text. It's the data plans that aren't sufficient. The other problem is home computers. A lot of students with disabilities, if they do have a home computer, it's often older. It may not support the applications that are used by the school. And their technology is often not up to date because the software maintenance agreements for technology are, well, they're very costly. There are also a lot of students with disabilities whose families just can't afford computers or their adaptive technology. So that is another barrier to online learning. The other problem that uh, arose was that you had educational assistants and people who work in disability services not being able to connect with the tools they need to make the content accessible for students, and not being able to connect directly with the students themselves for a while. So I had people who were saying, I don't have things like Abby Fine Reader, I don't have Acrobat Pro at home, and they didn't, their businesses, their educational institutions hadn't anticipated this and weren't prepared to add the additional licenses for the software on home computers. Also, home computers were not as robust as the computers you would use at work. There was no access to the photocopiers so that they could scan information in and then make it accessible. So you had students who were facing inaccessible content, and then you had the people who are tasked normally to being the intervention and helping them make that inaccessible content accessible, not having the tools that they needed at home either. In some instances, this is leveling out a little bit. A lot of the people who work in disability services still don't have all of the tools that they need at home to fully make content accessible, but they're doing the best that they can. So we have a real failure in the whole digital infrastructure when we try to shift to something that's completely online, like education. Library services are another barrier because so many journal articles are not accessible, or digital research papers. Students also don't have access to the library. They can't go down into the stacks and have choose articles and research material, and then again have disability services help them make that accessible. So there isn't the access to the material that they may need in order to fulfill assignments. Then we come to telecommuting. And for people with disabilities, there were a lot of the same problems that students were encountering. There were tweets online about how am I supposed to do my work if I don't have the applications, my work applications at home. There were problems getting VPNs to work with computers at home. There were a lot of people who wouldn't have their adaptive technology at home that they would have at work. For example, they may have a Windows desktop computer at work that has all of their work material on it, but at home they may just have their iPad or a MacBook Air, something that is casual and less work related. A lot of employees weren't working on laptops, and so there were no laptops for them to take home. And the whole issue of security came into play. Again, access to broadband and data. One of the emails that came in just before this this meetup started, was from an employee who said that she was trying to use the applications on her home computer and watching the videos. She said that she could listen to them. She is blind and uses a screen reader, but she couldn't do anything with them because all she heard was click here, then move over there. This will drop down, then click that. Okay, now it looks like this. And she had absolutely no idea what was going on the screen and was very frustrated. Online shopping is my personal pet topic because I have a lot of experience with online shopping now. Fortunately for me, the work that I do has always been digital, and my home setup allows me to continue working. So there wasn't a glitch, except for the 14 days that I was in self-quarantine. It was like everybody in the world was on quarantine. There were very few emails. The lists were quiet. Twitter was all about the coronavirus, so there wasn't a lot. LinkedIn was all about it. It was like this huge silence. And I decided that I would venture into online shopping. I do have neighbors who are very helpful, but I thought all of the time that the internet has been around, we've been told that the internet is going to be the savior of those of us with disabilities. I used to talk in workshops about being told, well, with the internet, you can stay home and work. You don't have to come to the office. You can go shopping on the internet. You don't have to go to the stores. You can do almost anything on the internet. We don't have to see you. We don't have to look at you. And so we can just kind of ignore you. That's not true. There is no real infrastructure that will support total online learning, total online employment, and especially online shopping. My first experience was okay. I am in a rural community, so I was afraid that there would be no delivery. We do have Sobeys and Zehrs do deliver. I usually shop at Zehrs or No Frills, so I gravitated toward those. Both of them use the same e-commerce place for their online shopping. So I see a lot. I go to the website. First of all, I turned my screen reader off because I couldn't rely on the fact that my screen reader was telling me accurate information and wasn't jumping around. I had no idea how many things I had added to my cart or how many of any item I had added to my cart. So I have the luxury of being able to use screen magnification or my magnifying glasses, and that's how I had to access online shopping. There were pages about accessibility, but not quite there. So my first order, I ordered it on a Thursday, and I was impressed. I had pickup, or no, I ordered it Friday. I had the delivery scheduled for Saturday between 10 and 11. Shortly after 10, I get a text that somebody was going to start my order shortly. They were running a bit behind. Hey, that's okay. Then at 20 after 10, I get an email, somebody has started my shopping, and it was delivered to me by 5 minutes after 11. And I only had one thing that they couldn't get. So I thought, okay, this was good. But for delivery, you're only allowed to choose from a select number of items. And it's like shopping in a convenience store. They're generally higher priced items and not items I would normally buy every day. Although I did find that President's Choice does have frozen scallop potatoes. So that was a winner for me. The pickup, which I couldn't do because the only place in the county where using the Zehrs Loblaws thing is about 45 minutes away. It's really on the other side of the county. And I could not ask my neighbors to go and pick up my grocery order. I was trying to be independent. And if my neighbors had tested positive, they wouldn't be able to go get it anyway. So I'm trying to troubleshoot things that could happen if I have COVID. If I do pick up, I have more of the items that I would buy every day. So that for me was a major disappointment. The other thing that happened was that the second time I ordered to be delivered, and the first available time I had was a week. So now we're stretching out, and there are some parts of the province where if you order online now for delivery, even for pickup, the first available pickup or delivery is mid to late May, which is why I joke that I may survive the virus and die of starvation. So we don't have choice. And then the delivery options, this time it was very interesting. I ordered on a Tuesday. I was told the first available delivery was the following Tuesday. That was fine. That came, and again, I got the text that said, we're running a bit behind, 8 o'clock at night, we're running a bit behind, but we're trying to fix it. Okay, that was the message I got last time. At 9 o'clock, I get a text, we're not going to be able to fill your order today. Follow this link and rebook. So I followed the link and I rebooked for the following Tuesday. And it didn't accept that. So Thursday, I get an email from Instacart, which is the e-commerce site, that says, basically, we've chosen a new time for you. If this time isn't convenient, then either cancel your order or reschedule. So I go to my order. It says within 1 hour. It's like, oh, this is great. So I emailed them back. Yes, this is fine. Of course, this is going into a big black hole in space because I never hear back from them. So for 4 hours, it kept saying within 1 hour, within 1 hour. And then Friday morning, when I opened my email, they had canceled my order. So as well as the accessibility barriers, there are barriers of choice. There are barriers of delivery. The infrastructure for online seems to be more of a hobby rather than something that someone would use if they actually needed it. And for anyone with a disability who had previously been taking advantage of online shopping, their online shopping schedule is now completely thrown out because everybody is trying to do online shopping. So this thing that was supposed to be a panacea that was going to allow us to stay in our homes and away from our community has been a dismal failure. My friends also tell me, just for those of you who are thinking of trying this as an experiment, don't choose produce, because the people who pick up the produce for you aren't as picky about what they're choosing for you. And a lot of the stuff was like really dead when it arrived. So I did decide, because I'm very experimental, I did decide to place another order, and I placed it immediately after they canceled my previous order. And this time I chose a new service that they have. There was a new radio button. It says fast and first, which means that whenever anybody's free between Saturday and Wednesday, they will fill your order. But when you choose that, your order doesn't appear in your order history. So a week later, I'm still waiting for some Saturday to Wednesday to get my groceries. Yesterday morning, I get a text, "We're filling your grocery order." And I'm going, what was my grocery order? I can't see it. I forget what it was. And that's why I say it's like Christmas. If there isn't a substitution, then you get these bags put on your front porch. I just tell them to leave it on the front porch. And you open them and you go, oh, is that what I ordered? This is great. I'll be able to try that. So I'm using the online shopping as an experiment, not ordering things. And I'm finished experimenting now. Not ordering things that I would normally get, and not ordering anything that was perishable. It was mostly frozen stuff and a banana loaf, because I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to get. So online shopping has been a complete failure. So to summarize this, we haven't even talked about healthcare. And if you go to the Autism Coalition YouTube channel, David Lepofsky and the coalition did a 2-hour forum on how the pandemic, how COVID-19 is affecting those of us with disabilities. I was part of it at about the 2-hour mark, and I only had 2 minutes, but everybody who was there represented people with disabilities who had different disabilities, people who were low income, people who had multiple disabilities, and they went through the barriers that they are facing with this pandemic. Things like there are no mobile testing sites. So if someone who can't access public transit it thinks that they have the virus, they are going to have to take public transit in order to go to a testing site, which then brings exactly my experience, where if you don't have it by the time you get out of public transit, you may have it. The other thing is that there isn't any personal protective equipment for personal service workers. So they are moving from home to home and they don't have protective equipment. So those of us with disabilities through this pandemic, what is being discovered is that we are increasingly vulnerable, and the things that are supposed to be there to support us really aren't. And it's revealing huge cracks in that infrastructure, especially the digital one, and our ability to communicate and get information. So I like to see the good news in things that are really horrible. And the good news is that I am convinced, based on what happened in 1918 and 1919 and 20, that in the fall, this pandemic will be back. So my thought is that we do have, from now until it does return, to start putting in place strategies. One of the things in terms of education and being able to train teachers and students on how to create accessible content, I actually contacted Yuda Treviranus of OCAD yesterday, because OCAD is perfectly positioned with the expertise that they have in terms of accessible design to be a clearinghouse and a central organizer for training within the province and helping people make sure that their curriculum is accessible. So I'm hoping that kind of idea is going to move forward. Yuta had already, of course, thought of it, and so we're talking about how this might move forward. So many of us have been raising these issues for years, and now is the time for our stories to be told. We need to tweet about it, we need to post on LinkedIn, we need to write it in our blogs. If you are still on Facebook, which I am not, we need to Facebook about it and let people know. I am a kind of glasses half full. Let's take advantage of this and use the time that we have. It's not too late. That's what I hear people saying. Well, it's too late now because we've already got online education. It's not too late. We have this time. And even if we didn't have this time, we can start now to make things more accessible. And the bad news is that there is so much inaccessible stuff out there. And trying to convince people who still don't want to be convinced or who still don't want to be inclusive is going to be difficult. Despite my good news scenario, there are still people that we're going to have to lobby against and advocate to in order to make this change. I think we need to take advantage of this significant shift in our society and the way that we do things and the way that we think about things in general as people without disabilities, and open that door so that those of us with disabilities are included as a lot of online work and education and shopping and telehealth moves forward. So we need to plan for the return of this and make sure that we have all of the things that we need so that when this does come back, it's not a shock. And anything that I can do to help with any kind of planning or any kind of promotion or any kind of advocacy, I'm willing to do, because I think this is an opportunity we all need to take advantage of. Oops. Oh, there's a slide missing. Should have been one there that said to be an advocate. One of the things those of us with disabilities are good at doing is advocating for ourselves. We now need to make that shift and advocate for our needs as a global community. We need to understand other disabilities, and when we do our advocacy, make sure that we include everyone and take everyone's perspective. The other thing is we need a seat at the table. We not only need a seat at the table as people with disabilities, but we need a voice. We need to be listened to. So I do have some resources, and of course, we have the Accessible Media Production Program at Mohawk College. And I do have the link. There is a handout. I've given you all of the information on these slides, including the links to these resources. So if you wanted to take a look at that program and possibly register, there's the link. I've also been talking about being an advocate. I have also been very active in terms of trying to put a voice to the barriers and to my experience. So I have given you some links to a CTV News article that I did, a press release from Human Rights Watch. What else do I have? Open Access Technologies did a blog, and the what is that? Disability access to education and the pandemic is an article that I wrote about the educational barriers. I also participated in that forum with David Leposki, and yesterday I did an interview with the PACIELO group that is going to be a podcast. There's my Be an Advocate sign. So again, what I would suggest is if you have a disability or you don't have a disability, now is the time to be a vocal advocate. Now is the time that we can influence and change things. And I think that we need to be heard as a group, and we need to make our needs known. So with that, I will answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Karen. That's great. The great thing about having this kind of a forum is that we've got so many questions pre-populated, and thank you so much for everyone for participating. I will say, for those of you that wrote longer questions, I have found a shortcoming in the Zoom chat. You can't copy and paste, so I've been feverishly writing out the same questions in OneNote to make sure we follow along. Karen, I think we need to start with one key question. What's the name of the county that still has rotary phones in 2020?
Norfolk
This,
County.
this to me seems like an egregious oversight.
Yep.
It's
Hey,
madness.
they have windmills along the lake, but there are parts of the county that are still, as of 2 years ago, they were still on DSL and dial-up. There were parts of it. Yeah.
Madness. Absolute madness. The other cool thing about this is, as a meetup, we had questions coming in from as far away as Pennsylvania, and I really hope, knowing how many people are on this line, or seeing how many people have been in class, I think it's really great to see how the effort out of Hamilton has extended beyond our 905 border and extended beyond that. And I really hope that this becomes something that we can continue, not these just localized meetups, but we've got a bigger opportunity to connect such amazing resources here locally in the 905 and extend that beyond the border. So we had a question that was coming in about student experiences, and I think this ties in with Cameron with your question, which one of the issue becomes, as a student, your requests become lost, and you're seen as your requests are seen as being unfair. And Karen, how do you suggest that a student with a disability approaches the school to get that accommodation beyond the normal accessibility office supports? Obviously, this is a very different scenario that we're dealing with, and online learning and LMSs, as well as Zoom or GoToMeeting, depending on what organization you're working with. How do you suggest that someone proactively and constructively helps the organization that's supposed to be helping them?
And this is one of the barriers that has come up with the rapid shift, that the disability services is now scattered. And so whereas you may have had contact with someone, you may not have contact with that same person. At this point in time, I don't have an answer. If you can't get a hold of your disability services person or the person who creates your alternate format, but again, the people who are creating the alternate format don't have the tools at home in order to fulfill some of the needs. It almost requires a brand new IEP or individual education program that is specifically geared for online learning. And I'm not sure that the academic institutions, because they're anticipating people going back in September, oh, that's a long time, have thought of that yet. That may be one thing to do to raise with, let me see, I would suggest the Ministry of Education, but that's probably not a good idea. Maybe you're.
Well, but it's interesting about that. So let me pull from the IEP comment. We're in a situation that has drastically changed the reality of our world, right?
Yeah.
The way we shop, the way we interact, the way we meet, the way we work, the way we have a meetup right now. Do you think that this becomes a catalyst for changing the way that educational institutions think about delivering content? Is the classroom, the physical classroom, dead? Or does it provide an inspiration for schools to now embrace multifaceted approaches to learning? Because when you talk about students with disabilities, I know when I was in university, we had a number of students who were deaf, and they would take up or hard of hearing, they would take up the front row with either ASL interpreters, or their hearing aids would be able to hear through assisted hearing devices. Do you think that now, through this kind of global pandemic, we shift the way that education is positioned, and higher education, particularly given the audience here, but all education has to change the way we think about delivering content in a more digitally friendly way.
I think that that's right. The one thing that I realize now with the schools that are mailing out print is that those students with disabilities then don't have that sense of community, and they've lost the relationship with their classmates because their classmates may have computers and they don't. Their classmates are able to do their assignments and they can't. So I don't know whether all face-to-face is going to end, because there are students who do benefit from being on premises, having that face-to-face classroom grouping. And there are some faculty and teachers who just can't replicate that. It's just not their teaching style or their personality. So I think this is an opportunity to make online learning more than it is, and hopefully includes being accessible. Excuse me. I'm not sure. There are some things you're going to have to do face to face. There are some, for example, animation courses. The equipment used for those, or geography courses, some of the equipment, it means that you have to be on site because the equipment is just so expensive. You can't have it in people's homes. One of the things that we found out in our course, with the PDF course, was that students couldn't have the applications on their home computers. And so if I were teaching at this time in a condensed course with the students not having access to the applications on their home computers, they would have been sunk. So there's a lot of things you can't just say, and I know that our Ministry of Education says that in primary or secondary school, at least 4 of your courses have to be completely online. Well, that's really nice to say, but you haven't thought of the logistics. You haven't thought of the changing IEPs. How are you going to make sure that all of the students in your school do have computers, do have access to broadband and sufficient data plans? There's more than just making that switch to online. There's that whole infrastructure. The whole digital infrastructure has not grown sufficiently in the past 20 years to be able to support this yet.
It's funny, we're about to announce an office in Germany, and you'd think as a developed nation and one of the leading nations and economies in the world, their internet would be top tier. And the reality is it is so sadly lacking. And I think we've all experienced, the slower load times of things like YouTube or video conferencing through Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams or Skype or whatever platform you're using. But I really am encouraged by the recognition of some leaders to see how we need to have this infrastructure in place, because it does provide at least a backup solution. When we talk about people with either temporary disabilities or situational disabilities that prevent them from coming into a classroom, if we've got a network infrastructure that's able to handle that doesn't just base things off of locational infrastructure, but nationally we've got that kind of access. My hope is that a pandemic like this becomes that level of change that we need to make sure that there isn't barrier to access to content. And there was an interesting comment, I think it was Ellen, oh sorry, was it no, hang on, yes, it was about LMSs or learning platforms, where incorporating accessibility features just becomes part for the course. It's not a value add, it's just built in. And part of that, I was on a call today earlier with someone, and they were talking about how they've got all these built-in features that automatically make things accessible. And Karen, I think you would agree that concept of automatic accessibility, as much as people are working towards it, still falls short. So we're still dealing with best intent, but a lack of execution. And what would you suggest organizations that are creating these LMSs or the institutions that are acquiring those LMSs be looking for when it comes to planning for not just accessible learning, but distributed learning?
Um, well, one of the things that it was on one of the slides back in 2015 in the United States, the estimate was that the buying power just for learning management systems alone was $79 billion. That is a lot of procurement power. If all of the academic institutions were to get together as a purchasing force and say, I don't care whether it's D2L or Canvas or Blackboard, this is what we require. And if you can't do that, then we're not even going to consider buying you. But it's the same with library services. A lot of the journals and the companies that make journals have the attitude, well, you know, people with disabilities, they're just a small segment of the population. But if you look at the buying power of all of the academic institutions in terms of journals and that, if everybody got together as a coalition and said, you know what, this is the way things are going to be from now on, and if you can't do it, then we will find a company that can. If you want our money, you're going to have to be inclusive and you're going to have to be accessible. This is also one of the problems with moving online is right now any faculty member can go on the internet and go, oh gee, there's a shiny little tool, let's use that in the classroom. And it's not vetted for accessibility. A couple of years ago, everybody was going to this thing called Pizzazz because they liked it better than PowerPoint. Well, PowerPoint's accessible. What's wrong with PowerPoint? Just because you have a shiny object in front of you doesn't mean you have to chase it. So we have to be, academic institutions themselves have to be more forceful in saying, you're not going to go outside of what we say you can use in an online environment. And then as a group, they have to use their purchasing power to make sure that everything is inclusive. When you talked about working, I can't tell you the number of jobs that I've had where I was mandated to sit in an office when all I did was answer the phone and do email all day because the people that I were working with in terms of supporting online education were all over the place. And you know, there was no reason that I needed to go into Toronto and sit in an office to do that. I could have done that from home. There were several jobs where I looked and I go, why am I traveling? The work that I am doing is sitting at a desk in an office, I can be doing at home. Not everybody is disciplined enough to do that. And that's why you would still need to have face-to-face for some and face-to-face for in terms of work. But this is a good opportunity to explore how we move to a more digital community in terms of work and employment, work and education and shopping and telehealth, healthcare.
It's fascinating. You made a comment about one of the PowerPoint alternatives, and I remember when Prezi came out and
Oh
everyone was
yeah.
obsessed with it,
Yeah.
and it was so horrendously inaccessible. But it moves and it changes things, and I feel like I'm immersed. But I think this becomes really interesting, and you touched on something very early on in your comment about procurement and the number of times where organizations don't know what they're even asking for. Is this, in our context here, AODA compliant? And companies will just say, yep, but they don't actually know what AODA compliance means. They don't actually know what accessibility means. They
Yep.
don't understand the impact to either an educator or a student. And that gap between the and forgive me if I offend anyone on this call, the old guard of teaching, which is I have to deliver my lecture and I'm not going to share my slides and you must attend everything in person, versus are we actually creating an immersive experience where people can access content the way that works for them? And whether that's a learning disability or a print disability or a cognitive disability, we can't discriminate against any of that. And we're still looking at a one-track delivery when it comes to what the professor likes, rather than what the student needs to be the most successful they can be.
Yeah,
And
I saw a there's a company in Calgary, I think it is, or Alberta, that has this product. It's called Leap, and what it does is it's for online learning, and I think it has like great potential, and it is, I think, learner centric. So you have this concept you want to teach the student, you go through this series of exercises, and based on how many the student gets right or wrong, it determines, well, you didn't quite understand the concept, so let me present it to you in a different way. And it keeps presenting that same concept in different ways to the student until the student understands it. And that is what education for me is about. Not just saying, well, you have 1 week to learn this concept. If you don't, we move on. But to give the student the different learning opportunities. And that's what accessible content does. If you can't learn it by print, there's an audio. If you can't learn it just with audio, then there's a video. If you need all three or you want all three, you can pick what it is that you need at that particular time to learn that particular concept.
it's a really, I really hope that those of us who are passionate about accessibility, and there was a question earlier about the unrelenting commitment of whether it's people with disabilities or people within the accessibility industry, the advocates, the people who are passionate. How do you just keep hammering home that now is an opportunity to capitalize on making all content accessible? And Sandy, to your point, accessible tools don't guarantee accessible content. The creator is always the problem, and we see so much content. And I know, Karen, you have, and so many on this call have seen submitted content that people think is accessible. But the reality is it's horrendous, and in some cases does a worse job than just a plain text file. That commitment and that shift in understanding how we communicate with each other is so imperative. And I hearken back to my days in university where a professor would just say things to try and sound smart rather than try and connect with the student. And as we rely heavier and heavier on accessible content and plain language and a communication level, that new commitment to accessible dialogue is even more available today. Yet we're still um, hamstrung by the fact that people won't engage or won't develop a better accessible option. We're dealing with overcoming the challenges of limitations within software or limitations within personal approaches to content. You know, this is my slide and it's an image and this is all you get and I don't care about alt text. That must hit a breaking point, especially overcoming this. And I would love to open it up to questions about, or just not questions, but comments about how people are seeing professors react to the shift towards digital conveyance of content. So please put that in. Christina's asking a question or commenting to Sandy that there are people who use Word every day who still don't know how to change margins. And I always go back to most people know about 5% of the capability within Word, yet we still try to hammer home use styles and use the things that are built in. Karen, have you seen a shift in your last 15, 20 years in being in accessibility as an offering? Have you seen this pick up lately? A shift in that engagement with the tools that are built in, particularly with Satya at Microsoft leading the charge for accessibility within Office?
Yes, I have. Even within the Microsoft MVP community, there's more interest in inclusion at all levels and for all products. But yes, because Microsoft is talking and tweeting about accessibility, there is a renewed interest, and they're trying to make the tools really easy, although they've just changed, of course, some of the keyboard commands for the ribbons. But I have noticed it may not be necessarily someone who's contacting me and saying, you know, I hear Microsoft is making things more accessible, but people are tending to gravitate because of legislation, because of interest, because of advocacy, gravitating toward the tools that do create more accessible content. And I just briefly like to comment on the sort of philosophy that all those of us with disabilities can expect is equal access to inaccessible design and content. If it's inaccessible to us, it's got to be inaccessible to people without disabilities. If we can't make head nor tail of what we're reading, then I would suspect other people are having problems with that as well. And so accessible design is basically good design. When I teach accessible PowerPoint, I'm basically teaching people how to use PowerPoint. The accessibility part of it, and to think, we don't design documents anymore. We fling text at a canvas. And that's how we were taught in the early 2000s. As long as it looks nice, get it out the door and publish it. And I don't think that we can accept that anymore.
Karen, I find it interesting, and Gary, I apologize for missing your comment earlier. There's a live stream that I'm receiving from all sides, and I think it's education based, not advertising based. I think that's an autocorrect. But why is it in 2020, after all the years that we have had accessibility standards and guidelines in place for so many industries or so many verticals specifically? I mean, the AODA is divided out. Initially, it was divided out into 5 standards, and education seems to always lack. Why do you think it is that we don't have a clear-cut understanding of what to do for accessible learning? What's the holdup? This is about an individual being able to interact with the world and find their potential in whatever field that may be. Why don't we have a recognized spec?
The education part of the of Bill 19111, or the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulations, deals with accommodation. It doesn't deal with learning. It primarily focuses on ensuring that students with disabilities are accommodated for, not included in. And it's the same with the article on education for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The focus is on accommodating for, not including in. And until our educational specifications and standards do minimize accommodation, we know that students with disabilities in certain situations should be accommodated for or accommodated, but that shouldn't be the go-to, and it seems to be the go-to. You have a disability, we'll accommodate, not we'll design the learning management system to be inclusive and include you in it. The other thing is that in the information communication section, it talks about being WCAG conforming, but it doesn't give any kind of guidance or specification. So within that one bill, you have 2 separate things that don't appear to touch each other. You have information communication, which talks about WCAG conformance, and then you have education, which talks about accommodation. So the standard, when it was written and when it was published, became law in 2012, was not forward thinking, and it basically reinforced, in terms of education, accommodation and not inclusion. So if we move forward with a new education standard, then the things that we're talking about have to be incorporated into it. We have to look at not only the accessibility of face-to-face learning, but because this pandemic has shown us where all the cracks and canyons are in digital learning, then we need to make sure that those are filled in whatever educational standard we are developing. And the educational standard has to connect in some way to the information communication standard. Everything is connected. We can't look at the standards as being in isolation anymore. And part of the problem is enforcement, both with Section 508 in the States and with the AODA here. There are ways that people can get out of them and can ignore them. and the enforcement has to be there as well.
Well, and I think that becomes one of the biggest challenges. And Cameron, I saw your comment about uh, how you don't understand how this isn't a human rights issue. It is, and it is mandated. It's been law since 1982, and the problem becomes the enforcement, as Karen just mentioned. There's no teeth. And
No.
without that stick, and for those of us in the industry, we want people to embrace accessibility and believe in the carrot and say everything is going to be better if we just embrace accessibility. But the reality is organizations don't move unless they have to. And
Yes.
and that becomes a huge issue. There was a subsequent comment by actually, I'm sorry, I'm Karen, bear with me. There was a comment about staff being, where did that go? I lost it. It was right there. Oh, there we go. Steph Rogers was saying that faculty are overwhelmed. But if we had LMSs that were already incorporating accessibility, it's the same content. All you're doing is ensuring that it's presented in an accessible way. So this becomes a real challenge. And I know even from someone like myself, when I'm teaching or when I'm giving a session, I don't use PowerPoint because I want to have a conversation. I want to have that dialogue. I don't want people reading off my slides. That works for some people, but it doesn't work for others. And trying to make sure that everyone is included, I think, relies on an educational institution to say, this is what we need. If you're going to sign a contract as an educator, this is how you do it. We require all of these pieces to be put in place. We will help you with the following components, but it's up to you if you want, bluntly, if you want to get paid, you got to follow these rules. And we see that in the private sector, and I'm not sure we see that in the public sector or the educational space. And the lack of teeth to the AODA, as much as we like to say there's enforcement, nobody's backing it up yet.
Well, and two things. A couple of years ago, well, no, and not that long ago, I was at a meeting to talk about accessible transportation. And as the discussion went, I finally said, look, access to public transportation is a human right for those of us with disabilities. And I was told that nothing turns people off more than talking about the human rights of people with disabilities. And the other thing was the Minister for Education a couple of days ago said that they would provide professional development opportunities for teachers. And it's like, it can't be an opportunity. It has to be, this is what you need to do in the classroom. Like you said, if you're going to teach here, then your material has to be accessible. We will give you all the support and the training. We have the facility to do that, but it has to be inclusive for everyone. Back in 2002, MIT was losing their first year physics students, and that was a mandatory course. They had like a 75% dropout rate. As an experiment, they decided, because the W3C at that time was in MIT, they decided that they would make the content for that course accessible. And the project was called Pivot. And they turned around and had a 75% graduation rate. So the accessibility was helpful for all students. So you're not just helping students with disabilities, it made learning more available to all students.
It's so disheartening that, as far as those of us in the industry feel that we've made progress, we truly haven't. And Lisa, I read your comment, and Karen, I was recently asked if the government would postpone the January 1st, 2021 deadline due to COVID-19. And the response was, sorry, no extension on your homework. You had years to do this. And I know that all of us keep hearing this pushback of, what do you mean we have only 7.5 months to do this? No, you had 8 years. And you chose to push this off and push this off and push this off. And it's only become a bigger issue for you. And it's so disheartening that after all of the work that individuals with disabilities, the advocacy, the people who are trying to change the way that technology is able to be accessed by people with disabilities, we get nowhere when it comes from business or when it comes from government for enforcing it. What do you think becomes that paradigm shift? I mean, we deal a lot in Europe, and the EU is really proud of the legislation that they passed, and bluntly, it's toothless drivel that yes, some governments will be accessible, but the reality is they won't. We've been such a forerunner in accessibility here in Ontario, and yet we still have so far to go. Why is it that we can't get this to buy? Why can't organizations really get behind this?
Well, we have been a forerunner in the idea of accessibility. I'm not sure that we have been a forerunner in the reality, just because of the enforcement issue. And people thought that it would just go away because the phase-in was out to 2025. People thought that it would just go away, and that perhaps with a change of government, then it would be something they didn't have to do. They always, most organizations who are fighting it are wanting a business case. And there have been several business cases. In fact, the W3C has an entire part of their website devoted to, here's your business case. We now know that as the baby boomers age, they have a lot more discretionary income, and they're also losing their eyesight and their hearing and their mobility, and they're not going to spend their money in places that they can't access to spend their money. Even back in 2012, it was estimated in the United States that people with disabilities had $14 billion worth of discretionary income. And that was used as an incentive, as a carrot, for people to make things accessible. You also have people with disabilities on the other end of the spectrum that are living at or below the poverty level. So, it's a balancing act of saying you're losing a lot of customers, you're losing a lot of clients, and then saying, there are still a lot of people with disabilities who are disadvantaged. It's kind of a quandary. But I mean, even in the United States, there's the idea of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but then when push comes to shove, Domino's gets sued, Target gets sued, because they decide that they don't want to do it. There were 11 universities in the United States that were sued because their content was inaccessible. And I know someone from one of the universities, and they had 15,000 PDF that had to be accessible within 6 months. And they had one guy doing it, and he didn't know anything about tagged PDF. So he managed to look at an automated checker, figure out how to pass the checker, and in 2 weeks he had 500 documents done. And when he sent me 5 samples, they were horrible, but they passed the checker. And I said to him, I said, you take this back to the judge, and it's going to be another lawsuit. People, for some reason, when it comes to people with disabilities, we are still not seen as having any value. And I think that is part of the problem.
Jeanette, Karen, I couldn't agree with you more. And Jeanette, your comment about they talk about inclusion by providing opportunities, giving more options or time. So cognitive or learning disabilities, but not about how students will access the material. And that becomes a fundamental flaw in how we approach accommodating students with disabilities. Not just inclusive access to content, but the reactive knee-jerk component. And I will just say, I know we're at 8:20 and we've got to finish up by 8:30. I think the dialogue has been fantastic. And Jen, if I may, this is what we need as a group. Maybe build it out as an A11 or an sorry a11yHAM LinkedIn group or something along those lines, because well, Karen and I aren't on Facebook, so we can't contribute. But this kind of a dialogue is what changes people's understanding and recognition that we need to be doing better. It becomes a fundamental shift in the way we think about presenting content, and that we've got to get away from the, well, I don't know anyone with a disability, or nobody with a disability works here. You don't even know if someone has a disability or not. So to rely on that old thinking of we're accommodating, no, we're inclusive. And I think the, you know, Allison and Sandy, you going back and forth about universal design for learning is a great point about that. It's not the accommodation model, it's universal access. And why we are still struggling for this in 2020 blows my mind. And I think any of us worth our salt in the industry want to be out of it, because we should be doing better. The development needs to be extending the capabilities of authoring environments and distribution environments. Karen, do you have any last thoughts just to summarize the discussion, your session, where you see things going?
It's what I've been saying for the last 2 weeks. It's not too late. We have at least 4 to 5 months to get some things in place and get things started. Everything doesn't have to be accessible by midnight, but we have to start now. We have to take advantage of this pandemic. I mean, if there's any silver lining in this, it's the focus that it has brought on the barriers, especially the digital barriers. In education, in telecommuting, in healthcare, and in online shopping. So we need to take advantage of this 4 to 5 months before we're all in panic mode again, and make some change. Be an advocate. Let our voices be heard. You know, tweet, LinkedIn. I was surprised. The first post I did on this on LinkedIn, within 2.5 weeks, I had almost 3,000 views. And I could not believe that that many people were interested in reading about the inaccessibility of information around COVID-19. So there are people out there. We need to support the grassroots movement that's already there, and take this time to make that push and focus on inclusion, not accommodation. Accommodation should be the rare event, not the norm.
Couldn't have said it better. That's fantastic. Karen, thank you so much. This is always a pleasure when you and I get to have an opportunity like this, and we've done it so many times over the years, so glad we could do it again. Jen, I'm going to throw it over to you for a few summarizing remarks. You ready?
I am, thank you. First, I want to thank Karen. Your efforts and time in putting this presentation together are really appreciated. You did a fantastic job, and I'm very appreciative, so thank you very much. I hope you're staying healthy, and I hope your food gets to you. A huge thank you to Adam. Adam didn't introduce himself, so I did put it in the chat. Adam is the president of AbleDocs, and AbleDocs is the supporter of our a11yHAM meetup group. And we're very appreciative of AbleDocs' support and Adam's time in hosting this session. So thank you very much, Adam. We had a great turnout tonight of bordering somewhere around 40 participants. So I think, you know, in this day and age when we're being bombarded by opportunities to engage online, it's a great turnout that we received, and I agree. I think moving forward, this will definitely continue in combination with our physical meetups when we're allowed to have them. It'd be nice maybe if we switch back and forth. We will have a next meetup next month. I think we're exploring the concept that being accessible doesn't have to be unattractive. As we look at creating accessible content, how we can do it to make it look good and be fully accessible. So that's something we're sort of exploring at this point in time. If anybody has an idea, though, that you'd like to share, that you'd like to present, or you would like to have us present, please let us know. We appreciate your time tonight. We are recording this session, so we will post that as soon as it's ready. Thank you all. Any additional comments, or we're good, Adam? Karen?
I think this is great. Let's keep it
Yeah.
up. Let's expand.
There we go. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening and stay safe.